Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me today is an all-star lineup coming to us from the Antietam Institute to commemorate the anniversary of the Battle of Antietam. And I'm going to start with my great ECW colleague from Western New York, Kevin Pawlak. Kevin, how are you today?
I'm great, Chris. How are you?
I'm even better because I get to hang out with you for a little bit today. So
All
that's
right,
always
fair enough. Too bad it's not in person around a bar, but we'll take
indeed,
it.
indeed. And then Hollywood Square styles based on my screen. I've got Mike Froning from Southern Maine, Southwest Maine, right?
You got it right. Yeah. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah. Is it snowing there yet? I mean, we're
Uh,
recording this at
yesterday, of course.
Okay.
No, happy to be here. This is quite the all-star lineup. So I'm just the couch potato historian. So
Oh, very good. Well, we're delighted to have you with us, man. Well, see, being from Maine, being a couch potato, Maine is a big potato producing
oh,
state.
that was pretty good. I just threw you that
Ah,
curveball. So
Nice.
see what I did there? Yeah. And Jim Rosebrock is coming to us from, I don't know, like, where are you based at this very moment, Jim?
I live near Frederick, Maryland, a little town called Jefferson between Frederick and Harper's Ferry.
Very good, very good. And Jim is a great expert on artillery at Antietam in particular. I wanted to just call that out because he's got a beautiful print in the background there. And no one has done finer work on artillery at Antietam than Jim. So I'll give you a shout out there for that.
Thanks, Chris.
So what I've asked these guys to do is sort of play along with me a little bit to talk a little bit about the battle, but I'm going to just kind of toss out some statements and we're going to armchair general my Antietam ignorance today. I think that's kind of the best way to approach this. All right. And so I've asked them to vote yay or nay on these statements that I'm about to make that are intentionally a little bit outlandish, and we'll let that guide our discussion today. I thought that might be kind of a fun way for us to approach things. So I'm going to start with the obvious statement here, and that is that George McClellan, just in general, George McClellan was awesome. All right, we've got 2 thumbs up, and we've got a oh from Kevin. So, so what does your little O face mean there, Kevin?
I never thought I'd hear you say those words. That's my surprise.
Too.
So in general, you guys give him high marks then. So, Mike, let me start with you because you're definitely looking like you're right on board on this.
well, I mean, I think if you look at George McClellan and what he was tasked at, I don't know how you couldn't not give him high marks. I mean, he basically was tasked by he was tasked by Lincoln and Halleck to protect the capital, protect the eastern large eastern towns like Baltimore and Philly. And he was also tasked to take the Confederates out of Maryland. So he basically did what he was told to do. And he did it well.
Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think a lot of the problem with interpreting McClellan is most people don't get back to original sources, original OR reports and things like that. And so, fortunately, there's a lot of fallout from the 1864 presidential election that somehow seeped its way into a lot of the historiography. So I think if you go back to original sources, I think you go back to Carmen, you're going to see, hopefully, a much more objective accounting of McClellan. He certainly had his work cut out for him in the campaign here. One of the things that a lot of people say, is the fact that he says that he believes that he's outnumbered. Okay, well, even whether he believes he's outnumbered or not, he still attacks. If you're a general believing you're an outnumbered army and the enemy's on the high ground, and you got a river to cross or a creek to cross like McClellan did, he still attacked. And I think he attacked very successfully.
Kevin,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead,
think
Mike.
along those lines too. If you look at what McClellan was given to start the campaign, you hear often about how slow he was to react and how he really allowed Lee to dictate the campaign. And I think if the more you look into it, the Union Army wasn't in that great of a condition. I mean, you think about what just happened, and we as historians now in the modern culture kind of want to put everything in a compartment, but basically Second Manassas just happened. He had to conglomerate four different armies into one. He had his supply lines were a mess. They never caught up, basically. And he actually reacted very quickly for the condition that he was in.
Kevin, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think both armies were hamstrung during the course of the campaign just by the condition. of both armies, and both Lee and McClellan are going to have to operate with whatever they have at this point. But I do think the Maryland campaign is George McClellan's best campaign. It's not perfect, and yeah, people might look at it and say, well, the bar's pretty low if you consider his other campaigns, and perhaps that might be true. But I do think you see a more mature George McClellan in Maryland, somebody who's learned from some of his past mistakes, I think, in the campaign, in previous campaigns, I should say, and in his relationship with Abraham Lincoln. And again, it's not perfect, but when you look at ultimately the objectives of the campaign, Robert E. Lee does not accomplish his objectives, and George McClellan ultimately does. And that's the ultimate objective that Lincoln gives him when McClellan rides out from Washington, is simply get the Confederate Army out of Maryland and back into Virginia, however you can do it. And McClellan is ultimately able to do that.
All right, so I'm going to ask a real question as opposed to an outlandish one here, because to sort of follow up on what all three of you said, because a lot of people sort of criticize McClellan because all he did was let Lee escape, but from McClellan's point of view, he's thinking like, I just did what was laid out for me. I've achieved my goals. And some people say, well, that's not enough. You didn't destroy Lee. You didn't win. So why is it we today have this kind of imperfect understanding about what McClellan was supposed to do?
Well, I'll just say to the point of destroying an army in the Civil War, it's damn near impossible, if I can be that blunt. You think, when watching Ken Burns' Civil War, one of the opening lines is there's 10,000 battles fought during the Civil War, and you can count on one hand how many times an army is literally wiped off the face of the map in those 10,000 engagements, and pretty much all those instances have to do with Ulysses S. Grant. So nobody is really able to do it at all during the course of the war. It's an incredibly hard task to just simply defeat, not only defeating an army, but let alone eliminating an enemy army. And I think it's just very easy for us today to say, oh, well, why didn't they just carry out this order or things like that? There are so many factors that go into these battles that make it almost impossible for a Civil War army to be completely and utterly destroyed. And even with some of the common things that people point out about the Battle of Antietam, that Robert E. Lee is fighting the battle with the Potomac River to his back and only one escape route. Yeah, it's true, but he's got 3 miles of ground, rolling terrain with other defensible positions between where Lee decides to stand outside of Sharpsburg and the Potomac River. So it's not as if Lee's standing with 1 foot in the river and 1 foot out of the river at all. There's still plenty of I shouldn't say plenty of ground, but there is still some ground for Lee to fall back upon and to maneuver on. So that's one thing that complicates the situation for the Army of the Potomac when it comes to trying to ultimately destroy the enemy army.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think to answer your question too, Chris, I don't know if McClellan's a real likable guy. I mean, not only that, I mean, if you think about who we idolize and who we lionize in Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans, I mean, he's a Democrat, he's a war Democrat, but he also, we have access to his personal diary where he just basically lambates the guy that we idolize in Abraham Lincoln to a certain degree in the general public. I mean, he's just a guy you just don't want to really, you love to hate him. So and I think that clouds judgment based on basing his performance on kind of likable or not. I think you really have to go back to what he was tasked with and how he accomplished his goals. I mean, if you go back to the idea that, Lee is audacity personified, I mean, you look at McClellan, he actually took the initiative and kept the initiative. He even gets lambasted for showing his cards on the 16th by bringing the First Corps over. But I mean, Joe Harsh mentions the fact that stole the initiative from Lee. Lee just didn't have an option after that. But McClellan doesn't get a lot of credit for that. He just showed his cards by doing that. So there's a lot of examples where people are looking for ways to hate McClellan, I think.
He is an easy guy to make fun of. He's an easy guy to dislike, but
he's almost become a caricature.
Yeah.
Rather than a real person.
It's interesting to me that these two armies fight a battle on one day. They both hold their ground. They're both there the next day. And the day after that, Lee retreats. That's the same scenario as Gettysburg. Yet, this is called a draw by so many people that probably Kevin and I encounter when we're giving tours. They call the battle a draw. Whether it's a tactical draw on the battlefield, I still don't think that's necessarily the case either. But I think we can all agree it's a strategic victory for the United States of America. But it's interesting that this is a draw, yet Gettysburg is a victory after very similar, sets of circumstances.
See, again, now I want to ask a real question rather than ask some outlandish one. I'm getting off my own topic here. Why does that popular myth exist that it's a draw rather than a flat out victory? Jim, let me just have you follow up on that one.
Well, a lot of the Confederates will use that assertion because they say, well, we held our ground at the end of the day. A lot of the accounts that you read post-mortem of the battle are they're very proud of the fact that they held their ground at the end of the day, and that's their standard for victory. And what happened 24 hours later is that they were on their way back to Virginia.
And if I could jump into something else that's interesting to me, if you measure a battle by ground that is taken, the Army of the Potomac does only advance maybe a couple of 100 yards from their initial line on September 17th. But again, if you're using that as a measuring stick, the Army of the Potomac loses more ground than it gains at Gettysburg, if you think about where their positions were on July 1st versus July 3rd.
Okay. Very good. All right. So here's my next question. And this actually goes off to, follows up on an earlier question. In the Antietam campaign, Lee lives up to his nickname, Audacity Personified. All right, so we've got 2 thumbs up, and we've got an oh from Mike. Even though we don't have the full on scream oh, but so Mike, why do you give us the smiley for the O face there?
Well, I mean, I guess it was audacious that he actually stayed there and fought, considering his situation. But I think Lee gets these interesting marks for being this audacious commander, and I actually thought he was quite stupid in this campaign, to be honest. It's hard to believe. I mean, even Porter Alexander mentions it after the war that basically there's no reason that he should have stayed there and fought. There was no benefit to it. I know, a lot of historians would argue that he was looking for an opportunity to retake the initiative and go further north. But if you look at the situation, we can armchair quarterback all this, but I guess it was audacious, but I guess I see it as kind of foolhardy.
I'm going to write this quote down. Lee was quite stupid during this campaign.
I don't want to, yeah, I guess that was a little harsh, but.
So Kevin, you gave him the thumbs up. Jim, you gave him the thumbs up. Kevin, how come?
I think when looking at Lee strictly from an audacious perspective, absolutely. You have to think of, firstly, the state that his army is in, which he remains pretty ignorant of. He knows that it's starting to leak stragglers as it's moving across the Potomac River into Maryland. But even despite that, then Lee is going to divide his army up into 5 separate pieces through Special Orders number 191, divide his army in the face of an enemy that he doesn't quite know where it is yet or what state it's in or how fast it's moving from out behind the defenses of Washington. But despite that, again, Lee's going to divide his army, even though James Longstreet was vehemently opposed to it, one of course, his top subordinates. And then Lee's going to make the decision once McClellan's army catches up with him to fight atop South Mountain to try to wrap up the Harper's Ferry operation rather than just simply calling it quits and getting his army out of Maryland and back into Virginia. And then, as Mike mentioned, Lee's going to stand behind Antietam Creek toward the end of the campaign, of course, which will lead to the Battle of Antietam, which, I mean, Lee himself admitted it wasn't the best position that he could have chosen, but it was basically the best position that he had access to at that point. And Lee was somebody, I think, in this campaign that recognized that eventually the timetable was going to work against the Confederacy, and he needed to achieve victory, overwhelming victory. The Confederacy needed to do that to achieve its independence as soon as it possibly could. And I kind of view Lee, when he came into Maryland, as the last thing that he wanted to do was leave Maryland. He was going to stay there and try everything that he possibly could before leaving Maryland. And of course, ultimately, he was forced to do that.
Jim, you think he was audacity personified?
I think Lee is suffering from a bit of a second Menaces hangover. I think there's this hubris he has about the United States Army that he's hearkening back to what he did 17 days ago at Second Manassas. And I think to some extent he thinks that he can repeat that here in Maryland. And I think the example of that is where he puts all the chips on the table is his attack in the West Wood. Division guarding the Lafayette McLaw's division. He takes a brigade off of the middle bridge and he hurls them against the northern flank of the United States Army. I think he believed what he was going to do was throw Hooker into the Antietam like he did at Gaines Mill or that Longstreet did at Second Manassas against Porter. And instead, he gets maybe a tactical victory wiping out Sedgwick's division, but now he's consumed all his infantry. And some of his soldiers will tell him, or will write later on, the end of the Confederacy's in sight. And they're not talking about 3 years later at Appomattox. They're talking about today at Antietam. And so I think audacity backfires on him here. There's something to be said for being a little too audacious. And I think he's got something that is coming out of the Manassas campaign that's still with him that he thinks he can just plow right through these guys. And it's another Army of the Potomac 17 days later.
I think another thing to consider that I just read a recent article on this. It was really good. It's this idea that, Lee also is what's his health condition right now? I mean, not only did he fall off his horse and basically have to be jerry-rigged around, but there's been a lot of scholarship to think that maybe, was Lee completely healthy? It makes you wonder. We're pretty critical on him, but he is. I think there might have been some health conditions there too.
And, that is one of the, that's what goes with audacity. You're going to risk big to win big. And sometimes that means you lose when you're risking like that too. So I don't think you can be audacious without trying to go for that big win. And Jim, I think as you point out, sometimes you don't win, but if you're going to try if you're audacious. All right. Very good. Thank you. Good answers. All right. So this is kind of a trick question, I think. The statue of Robert E. Lee at Antietam is a useful interpretive tool.
Ooh.
It's a trick question. I'm not trying to stump the panel, though. All right. Got a thumbs up. All right. A couple thumbs up. All right. So Jim, you laughed at the question. I don't know if you were laughing at me or at the actual idea of the question, but I'll have you go first. What are your thoughts about the Statue of Lee there?
Never laughing at you, Chris. It's the question.
You'd be the first one who wasn't laughing at me. So
yeah, it's in the wrong place. It portrays Lee as being in full command of his faculties when he's actually got 2 arms in a sling. It really just it can confuse people if they don't know the background of the rich philanthropist who decided, God dang it, I'm going to put a statue of Robert E. Lee on in my backyard when it was privately owned. And I think for years now it's been a source of confusion to people. And that's why I was laughing at the question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so and those are all good things that would work against it being useful as a tool. Okay. Very good, Mike. You said yes.
Yeah, I think that it's just it's in such a bad location, and it's just it's audacious in its own right. So people question it, and it's an instant conversation piece to talk about, hey, how do monuments get put on battlefields anyway? Why is it here? Why was it allowed to get put on here in the first place? It really is a conversational tool and opens up concepting around interpretation and around monuments in general, I think.
Oh, very good. Kevin.
Yeah, I was gonna say something along the same lines as Mike. I think anything on a battlefield, within reason, of course, but like a monument is a great, interpretive tool. You can use monuments or Civil War battlefields to talk about so many things just beyond Civil War battles. You can use that to talk about common soldier stories. You can use monuments to talk about, monumentation, obviously, on battlefields and veterans and what they did after the war. You can, through common soldier stories, you can talk about the war on the home front and what things were like. So I think any of the tools that are on a battlefield, again, within reason, like a Walmart would not be a good teaching tool. I guess it could be about preservation or lack thereof. But I think anything can be a good teaching tool. And like Mike said, it prompts people to ask questions.
So it's, and I've actually found it to be a useful tool. I'm critical of the fact that it's in the wrong spot, and Park Service didn't have anything to do with that. But that again opens up that conversation about why is it here and what's it do? What's the portrayal of Lee? The plaque, offers a particular interpretation of Lee. So, the questions that it opens up. But I've always had those same concerns that Jim has mentioned as well. So,
well, I think the
it's a
other thing
win.
that monument does too that's really interesting is now you can start talking about how national parks actually get started and the whole preservation concept and what an inholding is. And not to get overly technical, but you can open up conversations as to, hey, what are these national parks anyway, and how do they expand?
Yeah, great. All right, very good. All right, so next question. Special Order 191's role has been way overblown. It's fun to watch the three of you be like,
Just trying to find the right emoji to use.
Yeah, totally. I wussed out. I just did smile.
All right, so Mike's giving us a smiley laughy. All right, we got a thumbs up from so Jim thinks that Special Order 191's role has been way overblown. And Kevin, he's got the mask of silence there. So Jim, let me start with you. Since you agree with this, tell me your thoughts on Special Order 191.
So many people, including Lee himself after the war, intimate that is the reason that he didn't succeed in the Maryland campaign, and that it was the scales fall off of McClellan's eyes when he scans that Special Order 191. I think, if you do some real close looking at what McClellan's doing at the moment that arrives in his hands, many of the things that people believe he did as a result of seeing Special Order 191 are already in place. He's pushing the Ninth Corps forward down the road to Middletown. He's got Franklin moving up closer and closer to Harper's Ferry. So I think that I think it's more of a confirmation in McClellan's mind of what Lee may be doing than it is this is exactly what he's doing. And I didn't have any idea what Lee was doing before I saw this kind of a thing, which I think some people believe is the story of Special Order 191.
Okay. So Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it perpetuates this myth of who McClellan was. It's a really good story to show that, hey, this is just a bumbling general that if he didn't have access to 191, he couldn't even have any idea what Lee was doing. I agree with Jim to a certain degree that, I think that McClellan was already stealing the initiative at that moment. Like, I think that he really knew what he was tasked to do. He was moving forward. I do think it's somewhat overblown, but gee, what a great story. I mean, come on, it's just a fantastic story. It gets people thinking and talking about the concepting of orders. And I do think that it probably shaped McClellan in some of his thought process, and it maybe got his butt moving a little more. But I mean, I think some of that's conjecture to a certain degree, but I do think that I agree with Jim. I think that it's been overblown a little bit, and it feeds into that myth of McClellan, and he's just a bumbling leader without it.
So Kevin, you had an emoji that had no facial expression at all, just two eyes. Like you're the silent man on this. But
I was trying to think of something that was just like yes and no or indifferent. I take option C, I guess. But
okay.
Of the thousands of emojis that were offered to me, I couldn't quite find one, so that worked. But I would say, in the case of 191, Lost Orders, whatever you want to call it, I do think it has been overplayed, certainly. But I think sometimes recently it's been overplayed to the point where it's now viewed as it didn't make any difference at all to the campaign. I don't think that's true either. Firstly, it's certainly not something unique. Within a month of 191 being found, so from mid-August to mid-September, there were 5 separate instances of an opposing army's orders coming into the hands of the enemy. It happened multiple times during the Second Manassas campaign, so this is nothing like it's groundbreaking. This is the only time it had ever happened, et cetera, et cetera. That said, though, I do think 191 does provide some clarity to George McClellan. So as McClellan is moving his army out from Washington toward Frederick, he is aware before the orders come into his hands on the early afternoon of September 13th that Lee's army has left Frederick, but he's mostly confused by what that means because his scouts are reporting to him that that Lee's army is moving both toward Harper's Ferry, which would indicate he's moving south, and he's moving toward Hagerstown and Williamsport, which would indicate that the Confederate Army is moving north. And McClellan had a very hard time trying to figure out why that was or what that meant exactly. What was Lee's intent? So 191, he had the what. He knew where Lee's army was and what it was up to. He did not know why, and 191 gave him the why.
Very good. Very good. I'm liking these answers. It's a good discussion. You guys are doing, I feel like you guys got together with the questions ahead of time, like someone stole them from me and you guys all conferred and came up with the answers. All right.
The lost
So-
question versus the
What's
lost.
that?
The lost question versus
The
the lost.
oh my God. Yeah. They were wrapped in cigars that Kevin
Yeah.
smoked. It was,
All right.
very good. So my next question, the campaign was won and lost at South Mountain.
Too many emojis. It's killing
You could
me.
just stick with the thumbs up and thumbs down. It'll be all right. I tried to make it easy.
Even the thumbs down wasn't in the quick draw response.
Oh, wasn't okay. All
No,
right, all
I'm
right.
shocked.
So Kevin's giving us a thumbs down. Jim's giving us sort of a crying, weeping thing, and
Actually, that's the wrong one. I just
Oh. and Mike's giving us sort of a straight face. So okay, very good. So I'm waiting for Jim's final assessment
okay, here we go.
All right.
There are a million of
I feel like
them
we needed the Jeopardy theme, but that would
There's
violate
just
some
too many
copyright.
emojis.
Yeah, that's right.
I know.
See, that's the whole campaign. It's just the campaign is so filled with emotion that there are too many emojis to deal with here. So, all right. So we got a thumbs down from Jim and from Kevin. Mike, you gave us the straight face. I'm going to ask you to go first then.
Yeah, I think the reason why it's not thumbs down for me is that I do think it really highlights the fact that McClellan, he basically took the initiative from that point on. So I do think it impacted the campaign and had a huge outcome to the campaign, but I'm not ready to go so far as to say it was the major factor of how the campaign finished. I mean, clearly Antietam happened.
Yeah, right. Jim, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Mike. I think that that is the signature moment where the initiative it's already been swinging McClellan's way, but by the time South Mountain occurs, McClellan now has the initiative. What is the seminal moment I still have to say is Antietam, and that is because that's where Lee's army is nearly wrecked. And if you look at statistics and numbers, he never comes this close to having his army destroyed for the rest of the war almost. I mean, you have to get to the wilderness, you have to get to the Overland campaign to see casualties on the scale, casualties in the percentile that Lee suffers. So I think South Mountain is certainly important. I think it's a shifting, significant, decisive shifting of the initiative, but I think the Battle of Antietam is what does it.
Kev?
Sorry to disappoint, Chris, but I don't have anything to disagree with what Mike and Jim said. For the main reason, again, I mean, South Mountain definitely has a huge impact on the campaign. There's no doubt about that. But the reason it is not where the campaign was won or lost is because Antietam happens. Lee still could have pulled something out of his hat. Who knows? That might have happened. I mean, George McClellan certainly didn't know. South Mountain almost was the point where the campaign was won or lost because Robert E. Lee determined on the night of September 14th he was going to take his army out of Maryland and back to Virginia, but he stopped at Sharpsburg for a litany of reasons and ultimately tried to keep the campaign alive. I think George McClellan was convinced that South Mountain was the place where the campaign was won because he had thought he had Robert E. Lee on the run. He thought Lee was going all the way back across the Potomac River into Virginia. The campaign was over. And then all of a sudden, his intelligence reported to him that no, Lee was making a stand at Sharpsburg. So I think it's ultimately Lee's decision to stand at Sharpsburg that sort of knocks South Mountain down a peg or two in terms of where the campaign was won or lost.
And just to pigeonhole on what Kevin said, I think under that same argument, you could make an argument that Harper's Ferry had just as much of impact, if not more, because it kept Lee where he was. I mean, if
Oh,
Harper's
no,
Ferry
oh,
didn't
oh, we're
happen,
getting there. Trust me,
Mm.
we're getting there.
sorry, I jumped the gun.
No, no, that's good. That's good. See, and if I was you guys, this is where I would argue with the guy who wrote the questions, because my answer to this would be that I think that South Mountain is where Lee lost the campaign, and then starting the next day, he's got to start a new campaign because his whole objectives all changed and shift
Mhm.
around. But see, that's just me splitting hairs, because I can do that because I wrote the questions, right? So, all right, so let's go to Harper's Ferry because, of course, as Kevin knows, Stonewall Jackson near and dear to my heart. So, Stonewall Jackson's victory at Harper's Ferry is the single greatest achievement of his career. So I'm laughing because Mike has put up an angry face. I was going to say single greatest achievement of the war, but I thought that was just too far fetched to go. Right. So Kevin's giving us a thumbs down. Jim's contemplating. Oh, and we're getting. Oh, yes! Look at that. Now that is his left arm, which is left in the wilderness. So,
There
Jim,
we
you're
go.
giving us the strong arm there. How come?
I just think of the success he has. He captures. It's the largest surrender of American military forces until World War II in the Philippines, and had that. And now we're doing what ifs, and I shouldn't be doing that here tonight. But what if Palmerston and Napoleon III got that message 3 weeks later? And that was the end of the campaign. I think it's a stellar accomplishment on the part of Jackson. I mean, we certainly would look at Chancellorsville as well and his actions in the Valley campaign, but I think this was a real, seismic moment in the Maryland campaign and in the war. If other things had not happened immediately thereafter.
Very good. So Mike, you had an angry reaction to my question.
Well, I think twofolded. I don't think you could even compare what happened there to the Valley campaign. I mean, they still study his leadership in the Valley campaign and what he did there in 62. But for me, my anger is that I think we as closet historians or historians, we want to talk about the generals, we want to talk about their impact. But he had a subordinate there that had never seen independent command, gets no credit. Like McClaws did amazing things in that battle, and I think we go too far to say, well, Jackson took Harper's Ferry. You could argue that Lafayette McClaws took Harper's Ferry.
And I think that would be a great argument, actually. So, Kevin, thoughts?
I think what Jackson does at Harper's Ferry is incredible with everything that he's able to do and capture with essentially minimal loss. It really is incredible. I just think that there are a few other maneuvers in Jackson's career, specifically the 62 Valley campaign and Jackson's march around Pope's army during the Second Manassas campaign that have a more lasting impact on strategy in the Eastern Theater, especially the Valley campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, and that's I think an important caveat is the impact on strategy. He does a lot of flashy things, lots and lots of flashy things, including this, but for it to be the greatest of his career. The thing that always impressed me about Harper's Ferry is that he's got the patience to let it happen, which is not necessarily a Stonewall Jackson trait. And he shows probably his most patience of the war is what I would say. All right. So, the Battle of Antietam itself, I'm going to say, let's just jump to the Porter question that I have here, because this is a lot of people ask this. So Fitz John Porter had a well-informed rationale for not putting in his reserves at a key moment. And I tried to phrase this in a way so we weren't asking a what if he did or didn't. So do you think he had a well-informed rationale for not putting in his reserves? All right. 2 thumbs down. Jim's thinking.
Looking for the right one.
All right. That's right. See, I appreciate your willingness to play along here. Oh, and we've got the face with it's a neutral face here. So let me start with Kevin, since you were quick with that thumbs down there. Why do you think he did not have a well-informed rationale?
Because it wasn't his call. I think it really, when you boil down there's the story of Porter turning to McClellan saying this is the last reserve of the last army of the Republic. I think that story has been pretty well debunked as not being truthful. When you look at the source material and what actually happened, it was probably more the call of George Sykes, Porter's division commander, who decided to pull the infantry of the Fifth Corps back toward Antietam Creek on the afternoon of the 17th. Porter would say, though, he would comment in his report that he just didn't think if it had come down to it, that he had enough men to go forward. One thing that's important to keep in mind with the Fifth Corps is the Fifth Corps was spread out all over the battlefield on the afternoon of September 17th. Two of Porter's brigades that were supposedly in reserve east of Antietam Creek, just standing there behind the middle bridge, they were actually all the way up at the upper bridge by that point. And Gouverneur Warren's brigade of the Fifth Corps was down at the lower bridge supporting the Ninth Corps. So Porter really only had, according to his own report, which we can quibble with at least, but according to his own report, he only had about 4,000 men there in the center. But again, ultimately, I think it was George Sykes that really called the infantry back, not because, simply because he believed they had gone beyond what they were supposed to do. They had exceeded their objective, and so he pulled them back.
All right, very good. Mike?
Yeah, just to add that, I think Kevin's right on. What reserves? Humphreys doesn't even get there till the next day, so that's a whole division of men that weren't even there. And I think ultimately, yeah, I just don't think there were many reserves that he could have put in, to be honest.
Okay, Jim, you had sort of a middle of the road response there.
Right. Yeah, I don't see him being really heavily engaged. I see, like Kevin and Mike said, the guy that's calling the shots there is Sykes, and Sykes's orders to his regulars on the West Bank are protect the artillery. And he had a guy in the name of Hiram Dreyer who's got the initiative, takes the initiative and pushes forward and discovers that, hey, we have a chance to go all the way over the top there. And Sykes pulls him back. And, we had those articles in the Centennial, Thomas Anderson's, and then and Porter back and forth in the 1880s, which kind of muddle the story a lot. But I don't think he was that. Not, I don't want to. It sounds perhaps wrong that he was not engaged, but I think Sykes is calling the shots here, and we can banty around the ideas that maybe Porter's worried about what may be happening to him politically or based on some of the things that happened 17 or 18 days ago, and maybe he's cautious there, but that may be another question in your mailbag, Chris. I'm not sure.
My mailbag is all over I can't really see it here now. It's all over the scratch. That's why I'm just going to ask the Porter question because I can't read my notes right now. So well, let's follow up so follow up on that though, Jim. Tell me about why, would this be weighing on Porter's mind already because of things that went on at Second Manassas?
I know Kevin has put a lot more thought into this maybe than I have. Marvel's book that came out a couple of years ago, Radical Sacrifice, really teased this out, I think, very well. I think there's some degree of concern on his part about what could potentially happen. And, within 3 or 4 weeks, he's going to be relieved of command and on his way back to Washington for a court-martial. So I think there could be something to that. I'd sort of see what Kevin and Mike think too.
Yeah, I think it also impacts Franklin as well. I mean, he's very, well, maybe it's just Franklin. He's very timid, obviously, after Burkittsville, and it makes you wonder what they're thinking in terms of their future.
Yeah, Kevin, thoughts?
So I'm not quite convinced that Porter even knew charges had been pressed against him or were in the process of being pressed against him when he was in Maryland. He definitely does move to try and secure some of his correspondence from the Second Manassas campaign, just I think as a CYA for himself. But he doesn't indicate in any correspondence that there have been charges pressed against him. And also, Pope's charges won't be pressed against Porter until really November of 1862. There is a board that's convened on September 5th, if I'm remembering correctly, to look into charges of 3 federal officers at Second Manassas, Porter, Franklin, and 5th Corps Brigade Commander Charles Griffin. But basically, the court forms. They meet for a few minutes and then they're dissolved just like that. And I've never seen any evidence that Porter was ever aware, or Franklin for that matter, that that board even existed.
Okay, very good. All right, next question here. I'm jumping out of order now. Mansfield's loss was more crippling to the Union effort than is generally appreciated. Oh, we got sort of an angry, scrunchy face. I don't even know how to describe that, Mike. Okay.
It says confounded.
Confounded. Okay. All right. So I've confounded Mike. Ooh. Okay. And Kevin's giving us a thumbs up. Oh, and we're getting a thumbs down from Jim. Oh, I got a really good question here because I've confounded one of you and the other two disagree. That's great. So let me start with the thumbs down, Jim. You don't think that has been underappreciated. Tell me your thoughts about Mansfield.
He's been in command for 2 days. He doesn't know he's got a lot of green troops. He's got a couple division commanders that he's never worked with before. I think that had he had more time, I mean, he's a personally brave officer like Hooker and Sumner. He's out on the front leading a corps commander, maybe shouldn't be out that far. I think his potential perhaps is unrealized. His only other action in the war was down there at Norfolk, a few months ago. Everybody thinks he flew a desk the whole war, but actually he was down in Norfolk when Lincoln was down there, if I'm not mistaken. So I think his potential has not really been realized. I think McClellan maybe made a good choice in bringing him out here. I don't know if he had any political pressure to put Mansfield in charge of something or not, but I think had Mansfield had some more chance to get to know his commanders. I mean, the men seemed to like him when he'd ride through the divisions. They would cheer the old man in the white flowing beard as he went by. But I think his potential is unrealized.
Kevin, you gave it a thumbs up. You think that it was a loss more crippling to the Union effort than has generally been appreciated?
Yes, but I think as part of a collective. If you look at how the loss of commanders impacted McClellan's mindset during, well, really September 17th, during the afternoon of September 17th, and even with his decision whether to attack or not on September 18th, Joseph Mansfield is the third corps commander that's been lost within the last 3 days. If you include Jesse Reno at South Mountain, Joe Hooker goes down, of course, early in the morning's fighting, as does Joe Mansfield. Again, if McClellan's looking at it, you've just lost 3 corps commanders. And I think so as part of a collective, Mansfield's mortal wounding does weigh on McClellan when thinking about who can he look to, who can he trust. And of course, anytime a commander goes down on a battlefield, it's going to muck things up a little bit. As Jim mentioned, the 12th Corps does have the advantage of only having had Mansfield for 2 days before that, so they can kind of jump back into their old ways pretty quickly. But yeah, I think as part of a collective, Mansfield's loss does weigh on McClellan's mind.
All right. So, Mike, are you less confounded now?
I don't know if my confounded answer was because we just wouldn't. I agree with Jim. We just don't know his impact. He just didn't have enough time. And basically, with Alpheus Williams and Green both, I mean, 12th Corps is being run by their division commanders. Really, I mean, they're super strong and they knew what they were doing. I mean, I think Chris Bryan talks a little bit about the impact that Cedar Mountain also had on the 12th Corps and how they are. They're cobbled together here. It's amazing what those guys do in this battlefield because that's a cobbled together corps with brand new units that have just got those that fought in Cedar Mountain were just chewed up. And to accomplish what they did at Antietam was amazing. So I'm not sure we really have enough information to see the impact of loss of Mansfield.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. It's a very fair answer. All right. Ambrose Burnside is an idiot. This is a question coming from a dude who is in Fredericksburg, who gets that question or comment all the time. So, so Kevin's giving us a thumbs down. We're getting an angry face from Mike. And a thumbs down from Jim. All right, let me start with the angry face, and then we'll do the 2 thumbs down. So, this question makes you angry?
Yeah, I think I've done a lot of studying on the Ninth Corps, and I think that Burnside gets the raw end of the deal here. Do I think he was an amazing general? Probably not so much, but do I think that Corps level command escaped him here? Like he was a wing commander, right? So He gets a lot of discredit for the role he plays in the Ninth Corps and what they were able to accomplish here. If you walk that part of the field and understand what his men had to endure, not only at Antietam, but South Mountain as well. And the fact that that corps is cobbled together by pieces of divisions and corps, and his one division commander, Orlando Wilcox, literally had to get introduced the day before the battle to his commanders. So he's literally that new and that fresh. So again, for the Ninth Corps to accomplish what they accomplished, in my opinion, in that area is just amazing to me. I think Burnside really was thrown into the fire here, and I blame more McClellan in terms of just some of the command and control issues there. And it's just that muddled together command structure between him and Cox and McClellan. It just wasn't handled well. And I'm not ready to say that Burnside was at fault for that.
Okay.
I mean, where I think it was a little weird was on the 15th. After South Mountain, he was very slow in getting his corps to move forward.
Okay. All right. Very good. Jim, you had a thumbs down. So you do not think he's an idiot.
No, I don't think he's an idiot. I think that Burnside has been successful up to this point in the war because he's been able to pick good subordinates. If you look at, he's got Park, he's got Reno, he's got those guys who really did a great job for him in the North Carolina campaign. And so he comes to the Army of the Potomac and he starts losing these guys. Park becomes his chief of staff, Reno's killed. And so his ability to pass on the accomplishment of his missions to capable subordinates is suddenly changed. Wilcox is new. Sturgis is, Cox is a political guy from Ohio, and Rodman's just come up and taken command. So he doesn't have the style that he's used to exercising that so effectively in North Carolina. That style cannot work for him because he's got a whole different set of characters here. So I think he's probably a pretty good judge of selecting his subordinates, if in fact he was the one who named all those guys when the Carolina campaign started.
And you had Isaac Stevens in there too, and the loss of him in Chantilly had a huge impact.
Yeah.
Kevin, you do not think that Burnside is an idiot?
No, I also would not elect him to the Civil War General Hall of Fame either. But and there is plenty I would criticize him for in the Maryland campaign, certainly. But really, to Mike's point, I mean, if you go down there and walk the terrain that the Ninth Corps had to navigate, it is not easy, starting with simply getting across the bridge that now bears Ambrose Burnside's name. If you think about it, Burnside's Ninth Corps, Cox's Ninth Corps, with Burnside overseeing it, whatever, they're the only ones that have to fight to get across Antietam Creek. And despite what some Confederate soldiers, namely Henry Kidd Douglas, wrote after the war, Antietam Creek was not a hop, skip, and a jump to get across. It was not an easy barrier for the Federals to crack, and Burnside's the only one that has to cross it under serious contention from the Confederate forces. And then to have crossed the bridge and then stage what we call the final attack and really put Robert E. Lee's army on the ropes is pretty incredible what those guys were able to do despite all the handicaps that they had, some of which originated with Ambrose Burnside. But he has his good days and bad days like anybody else. And I think Antietam's he's an okay day. He's not an idiot, that's for sure.
Yeah, I always describe Burnside as spectacularly mediocre. I mean, he's like that.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, he's like that in the Overland campaign. It's just, but it is funny because he has the bridge and everyone's like, oh, I couldn't get over the bridge. But then there's this irreconcilable part of that story where he does put the Confederate army on the ropes at the end of the day. And so if he's an idiot, then how does he achieve that? And really, people are so quick to buy into these myths that they don't necessarily kind of, A plus B equals,
And you look at his attack too, it was supposed to be an echelon attack. And if you look at that lay of that land, oh yeah, good luck with that. I mean, the division I studied, Kristen Welsh, which were right next to each other, complained that the other was too slow. Well, it's because they couldn't see each other. And that was just one division. It just, to me, that whole idea and concept of the attack might have been a little flawed, because to even think of an echelon attack actually succeeding there it's shocking they were able to do what they were able to do.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that's one of those things, if you walk the battlefield and you actually see how tumultuous that land is and how easy it is to really get lost in those swales, boy, that makes it make a whole lot more sense than just looking at arrows on a map.
Mm.
All right, Kevin, this is a question for you. I mean, I want all of you to answer it. The Battle of Shepherdstown is the single most important episode of the Antietam campaign. I'm asking that with tongue firmly in cheek there. There we go. So Kevin's celebrating. Kevin's got a great book about the Battle of Shepherdstown, so that's why I'm asking it. So Mike's sweating this one, huh? Is that it?
So sweating, absolutely.
I'm actually finding that was the ta-da was that was my initial response, but I'm actually finding my real
Oh yeah,
response here.
fist bump from Jim. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So Shepherdstown's definitely an overlooked part of this campaign. So Kevin, let me give you the first word on this, though. Why is it something we really need to pay attention to?
Well, because, Antietam does not. You read general histories of the Civil War. The Battle of Antietam was fought on September 17th. Authors have to they have to sell books, so they criticize George McClellan for not attacking on the 18th. Got to write about that. And then the Confederate Army just vanishes across the Potomac River into Virginia, and it's done. Just like that. Well, there's 700 casualties at Shepherdstown that would tell you otherwise, that it's not the end of the campaign, or that, Antietam is not the end of the campaign. That there's still fighting left to be done at Shepherdstown. And it's not really a retreat by Robert E. Lee's book either. He's still, by bringing his army back across the Potomac River and into Virginia, he's trying to swing his army north to Williamsport to re-enter Maryland and continue the campaign from there. Now, it's an incredibly tall ask for Robert E. Lee, but it doesn't mean that he didn't try it. And he did. And the events at Shepherdstown, namely the loss of 4 guns of the artillery reserve, not 44 guns like William Nelson Pendleton claimed it was, really puts the brakes on Lee's movement toward Williamsport. He sends most of his army back toward Shepherdstown, and by the time the army gets back, ironically, A.P. Hill is able to smash Fitz John Porter's 5th Corps troops that have crossed over to the south bank of the river. But it shows that movement back toward Shepherdstown shows Robert E. Lee that he's just run the wheels off of his army. And that's ultimately where Lee calls it quits, is south of the Potomac River, not west of Antietam Creek.
Very good. Mike, you want to add to that?
No, I think Kevin's right on. I think it highlights, Shepherdstown highlights the condition of both armies. You think about what the Confederates had done from 7 days battle all the way to here. I mean, the army was just done. That was it. That's all they had to give. And like Kevin said, I mean, talk about audacity. So Lee leaves reserve artillery to guard the crossing, and then he's thinking about going all the way up to Williamsport. Like, what did he think was going to happen? I mean, it's William Nelson Pendleton. I mean, really? Are you serious? I mean, it was very interesting. The whole concept of that is interesting, that he was that audacious to have that kind of a plan. And then on the other end of things, I mean, let's give McClellan some credit here. Not only did he finally cross the area and give Lee some grief here, but he even anticipated Williamsport. I mean, he had the 6th Corps there before Lee could even shake a hand. So, I mean, I think McClellan just never gave up the initiative once he took it. I think it's a testament to his leadership.
Very good. Jim, you had the best emoji of the day, I think, with the fist bump. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, my man Kevin did a great job in analyzing.
I appreciate that.
I think just underscoring what Mike and Kevin said, if Lee had any notion about continuing this campaign, he saw how terribly shredded or disheveled the army is, and the lack of ability to respond. I mean, he puts 2 tiny little brigades on the creek to quote, help William Nelson Pendleton out, and I think that from the President of the United States in Washington, it's now Lincoln sees that they're heading south towards Winchester and not north towards Williamsport. And I think that puts the frosting on the cake for calling that cabinet meeting the next week and announcing the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Maybe a stretch, but I don't know. I think Lee moving south versus Lee moving north is the thing that sets Lincoln forward on that decision.
A big difference there, isn't there?
Yeah.
All right, my last question in our thing, and then I'm going to kind of end on a more personal note for you guys. Ezra Carmen is the book to read on the Antietam campaign. I'm getting 2 thumbs up here, 3 thumbs up. All right. So Carmen remains the definitive guy, early battlefield historian. Jim, why is it he's the guy that we still want to read?
I sort of think Carmen is the Old Testament and Hartwig is the New Testament.
Okay, so because I want to bring Scott's book into this, it's just sort of like a trick question for you guys.
Yeah.
So
No,
Old Testament, New. I like that. Okay.
It's all the primary sources, you know, that you could ever want to get or that you could ever hope to get for the Maryland campaign. It's a little hard to follow. It's real hard to follow. You know, he'll have an 8-line sentence with 14 pronouns in it, and you don't know who the last he is in it. But the work is so important, and really then extending that to what Tom Clemens did with the footnotes. Those footnotes that underscore where he gets all that and how he gets all that are really what make that the source. Now, it may not be something you would turn a visitor at Antietam onto when they arrive there and say, hey, what's the first book I should read? But if you're serious about this, I think Carmen is who you want to start with.
Mike?
Yeah, I think it's right on. That's the beauty of being an Antietam geek, right? We're like the riches right now. All the books that are coming out on Antietam, all the new scholarship, the work the Antietam Institute is doing to further some of that scholarship. I mean, how fortunate are we? I don't know how many other battlefields have a set of maps like we have, that have a narrative like we have with Carmen, that we have all the series of letters soon to be published that were written from the veterans to Carmen. And then you add this amazing book that Scott Harwick just finished, where, you know, it's easy to look at some of these primary sources and say, well, why would you mess with anything else? You have the ORs in the primary sources, which Scott used primarily. Why wouldn't you just read those? But Scott provides this breadth of a narrative that it enables people that maybe aren't as geeky as some of us, that want to hear a story and hear a narrative about what these men endured. I mean, you can't discount what Hartwick has done or some of these other historians, but boy, I mean, Carmen is the Bible.
Yeah. Okay.
Really.
Yeah. Kevin? Anything to add?
Hey, Chris, let me just say, if you had Carmen as a writing student, you'd age really fast, probably. But there's a code that has to be cracked to reading Ezra Carmen, that's for sure. But I'd say Carmen is still the go-to book for the Maryland campaign, not taking anything away from Scott's wonderful work that he has done. But Carmen simply had something that none of us will ever have when it comes to writing the Civil War, and it's the fact that he was actually there at the battle. And he was able to walk the battlefield before power lines were put on, modern houses were built, the bypass was built around the West Woods. He got to see that battlefield both in the 1860s and in the 1890s, early 1900s, pretty much as it was. And he also got something that we will never, ever, ever have. I don't know how many times all of us will read a primary source and wish we could ask the person that wrote that source a question to clarify. Carmen got to talk with veterans. He got veterans to give him tours of the battlefield. He could ask them questions that we could never do. And I will say a good shout out again to Tom Clemens that both Mike and Jim have already mentioned. Tom wasn't even able to find where Carmen got everything. And so because of that, to use some of these quotes, the thing that really sticks out to me is as Abram Duryea's brigade was moving south through the cornfield, the first Federals through the cornfield, the morning of September 17th, lying just south of the cornfield is Marcellus Douglas's Georgians, and some of the officers in Douglas's line told their men to pick out a corn row to use to aim. That quote comes straight from Carmen. We've never been able to figure out where it came from, but it came from Carmen, and so it's taken as gospel, and you'll find it in almost every Antietam study.
Wow. Wow. Well, let me shift gears for us a little bit since we're in the home stretch here. And first, Jim, I want to just kind of put the spotlight on you for a quick second. We talk a lot about movement of infantry troops across the battlefield at Antietam, through the cornfield and the West Woods, across Burnside's Bridge, etc. But you've specialized in artillery, and I think that's an aspect of the battle that sometimes gets overlooked. Give us just a quick little primer. You know, why should we pay a little bit more attention to Antietam the next time any of us go to that battlefield?
I think when you look at the artillery action there are about 550 guns there. There are 10,000 artillerymen, 10,000 artillery horses, probably more artillery horses than cavalry. I think the interesting thing that has emerged in my research is the role of the Confederate, let's call them artillery battalion commanders. The Union doesn't have a comparable organization. And those field grade officers, those majors, lieutenant colonels that Lee has, guys who no one ever heard of, Bushrod Froebel, Scipio Pearson, come on. But those guys have the authority to move guns. And who moves guns to critical locations is those battalion commanders. And the other thing is the role that Lee plays hands-on very much so here with those artillery battalion commanders and shifting guns to critical places like the Real Ridge to stop the sunken road breakthrough, Harper's Ferry Road to stop the Ninth Corps, the surging Ninth Corps. So I think that is an important idea that's emerged from here. Now, that doesn't take away from the excellent artillery that the United States Army has, but we have to remember that Henry Hunt's only been in command for about a week. And so many of the great things that you see at Gettysburg that Henry Hunt's able to do take place in the next 9 months. He basically gets enough ammunition to the Army to fight the battle. And his reforms, the far-reaching reforms that we know about now that are so successful at Gettysburg 9 months later, are going to not occur till after Antietam. So artillery needs to be looked at. And, you know, I say that Gettysburg got 10 artillery books written about it. And until this one, we had Artillery Hell, which was a nice little catalog. But I thought it was important to learn about these men that pulled the lanyards and, you know, played those roles so importantly for artillery.
All three of you are involved. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just some great work that you've been doing. You guys are all involved with the Antietam Institute, which put together this artillery book that you mentioned. Give me a little pitch for the Antietam Institute and why people should get involved and pay attention to this great burgeoning source of scholarship that's now happening.
Yeah,
Well,
I think that's. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think that's exactly it with the Antietam Institute. Is Antietam has never really had a collection of people like this that can get together in formal places and do tours and talks. And, you know, we put books together as well, put scholarship together. There's 2 journals that come out from the Institute a year and a book a year. Antietam's never had anything like that where people are looking at this battle and this campaign this closely, or at least this many people are looking at this battle and campaign this closely. And I think that's the real joy of it, is getting to meet people from all across the country and all across the world that have this interest in Antietam and have a serious knowledge of it as well, that brings so many different perspectives to the table.
Very good. Mike, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm a bit unique here. I'm just a battlefield geek that has a full-time job. So for me, the Antietam Institute provides an avenue where I can meet with like-minded people that are just like me. And, you know, you get access to people like Kevin who are just a dearth of information that challenges you to grow, and Tom Clemens, who gives you just one nugget and you chew on it for months. Like, I mean, just having access to the amount of knowledge base that the group has, and to challenge you to think of new levels and new areas and new concepts. And I think it's just invaluable for people like us that are just battlefield geeks. And we can further scholarship, and hopefully, you know, I give back and I can encourage some of the younger generation to be more active and to learn more.
Super important. Super important. Jim?
And it's really what we see, a very motivated membership. I mean, we continue to grow. We continue to grow probably 2 or 3% a month when you look at the people joining. And those people that are joining are excited and motivated to have something like this in Sharpsburg that provides educational opportunities, provides new scholarship, and also preservation and philanthropy. We contribute to causes around here that help support all those goals with the Institute. And we're just glad to be able to be in a position now in our 4th year of offering this. And we look forward to seeing you at our symposium in the spring, Chris, when you're going to be giving us a great presentation, I think, on James Longstreet, is it?
I'm going to convince everybody that Harper's Ferry was the greatest achievement of Stonewall Jackson's career.
There you go. I'll be right behind you.
Listen, I'd be remiss too. Like, the other thing, the Antietam Institute's doing really good, and they're doing an amazing job of this, as well as other entities. Is we're a newer battlefield. You know, we're not Gettysburg. There's still land being preserved. There's still purchases that are being made. There are still inholdings that are being worked on. You know, the Antietam Institute is also working really hard with entities like the American Battlefield Trust to still preserve land. You know, my gosh, I don't know, we all can remember the idea of the Wilson tract where, you know, the epicenter of this battlefield had a house on it. And that wasn't a long time ago. So the work that Antietam Institute's doing to preserve that battlefield as well is just, it's instrumental.
And I'll just point people to www.antietaminstitute.org for more information about the many great activities, conferences, publications that the Institute has going. Now, you guys, to wrap up, you've all talked a little bit about preservation and the ground. So I kind of want to just give you the opportunity to, as we close out. When you go to Antietam, where's the place on the battlefield that speaks to you, that you like to visit, that you would recommend people go and walk in the footsteps of history? Jim, let me start with you.
I started volunteering about 18 years ago here at Antietam, and where I, for some reason, moved towards is, of all places, the North Woods. That is where it all started. That's the Joseph Poffenberger farm. And the words of Joseph Hooker kind of reverberated through my head a lot in those days. He said, "Gentlemen, tomorrow we fight the battle that decides the fate of the Republic." Those were his words as he sent his 3 division commanders off to bed the night before the battle. And so that's a place. It's not as well traveled, but so much started there on that day. And so that's always been a place that I feel my passion towards it.
Yeah. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I was one of those people that ignored this part of the field because I had just been spending 3 hours on the northern part of the field. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. Oh, let's go see the Burnside Bridge and then call it a day. You know, go to Bender's, get some food and some wings and call it a day. But I'd encourage you, you know, one day I just decided to do some reading on the Ninth Corps, and I actually decided to walk these newly preserved grounds. I mean, that's the southern end of the field is relatively new in terms of access, in terms of trails. And I would encourage you to maybe have a little extra lunch, recover a little bit, and spend some time on the final attack trail. Get over to the Sherrick farm, get over to the Otto farm, walk the land that the mile-long 9,000 troops from the Ninth Corps had to trudge up, because it's well worth the walk, well worth the effort.
Very good. Kevin?
15th Massachusetts monument on the western fringe of the West Woods. I'm not sure what it was. I mean, it's a very evocative monument with the wounded lion on top of it and the names of all the soldiers of the regiment who were killed or mortally wounded during the action. But that just drew me in when I was looking at colleges and was driving by Antietam on my way to visit Shepherd University, and I saw that monument and just realized how close Antietam actually was. That sold it for me. So I've always enjoyed going out there and getting to spend some time with the 15th Massachusetts.
Very good. Very good. Well, guys, I really enjoyed the chance to just do a little armchair general note with you guys today. It's a real privilege to be with such a great all-star cast.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for everything that you're doing with Emerging Civil War as well.
Exactly.
Thanks for all that you guys are doing as well. On behalf of Kevin, Jim, and Mike, I'm Chris Mackowski for the Emerging Civil War podcast. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.